Hi, ever wonder what it's like to work another profession or live in the underworld? Listen to unsuspecting riders give a 10 to 15 minute personal masterclass as I spontaneously interview them as they enter my taxi. I'm your host, Simon Rushton, and this is Taxi Chronicles. Morning. Yes, we're back with another episode, another rider. Today we have a lovely gentleman, and he's going to talk. He's been in the business of media, and he's done a lot of other things, and he's just going to give us some of his life experience and what he knows today. So nice to have you here today, Nicholas.
Good evening. Good morning. How lovely to talk to you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Nicholas.
I tell you what.
So you're talking about this.
Tell
us a bit about yourself first. Your history.
My history is I'm a television director. I never regard myself as famous, but I did lots of programs with Paul McCartney and Elton John and everybody else as a director and all that. So I've done tons of stuff. And
what was that like, working with all those?
Oh, it was wonderful. They're all, very interesting indeed. I'm a painter. I don't regard myself as retired. I'm 82, and so, but I don't regard it as being retired. I still paint in my studio
What kind of, do you paint landscapes?
Landscapes, big abstracts, everything else. I'm doing lots and lots of things.
Who's your favourite painter?
Picasso. And Matisse.
Why is that?
Because they're probably the greatest painters of the last century.
Okay.
And but I've got a political animal, and I've over the years known lots of people who are political. And one of the questions we were talking about earlier, I had a great friend who was at the Czech embassy, and he was the cultural attaché there, and he couldn't leave London and go to the country and stay with friends because he was being followed by the English police, the English Secret Service, the Russians and the Czechs. And it was a very interesting period, so I used to smuggle him down to stay with friends in the country.
How did you smuggle him?
How I did it was the Czech embassy, which is still there in Notting Hill Gate. I would park next to the pub round the corner, along the side of the pub. He'd go in the front door. I had my engine running. He'd come out the side door into my car, and we drove off down to stay with friends in Southampton.
He lying down then?
No, he just walked straight in because nobody noticed what he was doing. We went down to the country and spent a weekend with great friends in Southampton. And then, as I lived in Holland Park, I used to drive back at Sunday night because he wasn't allowed to leave the embassy over the weekend.
Who told him not to? The Czech?
The Czech government. It was illegal for him to leave London. And so I would drive him up Holland Park Avenue, slow down the car, he'd get out and walk back. I would go back to my flat just around the corner. So that's my experience of him. He was an extremely clever person. Very, very. And the English secret, what he did say, he defected to England.
So he was a spy then?
He was a spy. Well, I call him a spy, but maybe he wasn't. But anyway, what happened was he was in contact with the British government all the time, and in that period in the 70s, the British government behaved incredibly well. It was secretly organised. His parents flew into England because his father was the vice president of Czechoslovakia, and they flew the parents in he was guarded all the time so they couldn't snatch him. And they flew back, and he refused to go back. They pleaded with him to
go back to England.
To go back to leave England and go back to Czechoslovakia. And they said, well, we'll all be in danger if you don't. He refused to go back.
Who will be in danger though?
His parents, they'd be in danger because
if he doesn't
go back, because he had so much information. He had so much. So
what happened to his parents?
His father was the vice president of Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
And so it had to be completely hushed up. It wasn't in the newspapers at all. There was nothing in English press or Czech press. Nobody knew anything of this at all. And then the only way you could see his mother in the next few years is that he used to fly to Italy, and she'd fly out of Czechoslovakia, see him, and he'd fly back to England. That's the only time he could see her.
How did you feel when you were smuggling him around places?
Oh, I just thought he was a nice guy.
You weren't nervous for your life or anything?
I never thought of that.
You were playing the police?
I did.
The Russians? What was it? It was KGB in those days, yeah? So
yeah.
KGB.
But there are more stories I've got like that, and I can tell you other stories.
Go on, we've got time.
When the Russians used to come from the Bolshoi in Moscow, from wherever it was, the Bolshoi would come over, and I was directing in television, so I met all these famous Russian dancers. They stayed in a hotel in Soho, which probably people don't know this, but actually the Russians owned the hotel, and every room was bugged.
Okay.
And because the Russians owned it, this is what we're talking about in the 60s and 70s. So in London, a hotel owned by the Russians, and that's not known either. So I used to take them all out clubbing, which they weren't allowed to do. So
the Russians knew that they were going out because they had the place bugged.
They had to, and they pretend to. I don't know what they thought. We just had to pretend nothing was going on.
Okay. So you've had an interest in life.
Yes, you brought it all out of me, asking me these questions. I hadn't thought about that.
So going back to what got you into media?
Oh God, that's a long story. I started painting when I was 5, so I painted. I fell in love with art when I went to Paris in 48, with my parents and a wonderful family I stayed with, because my father was a communist, and the English Communist Party helped the children of the French resistance fighting the Nazis, and this wonderful Jewish family in Paris invited me to stay with them in Paris. That's how I fell in love with France, that's how I fell in love with art, and then from there I just became an artist and creative and things.
But you got into the media. How do you get into the media?
The media, because I went to art school. I was a long time. I went to Chelsea Art School and Slade Art School, which is University College. And then the ITV in the 60s was progressive and very modern and very far thinking. And they gave me an award for my first year there or something. They paid for my travel scholarship or something, and then they paid for another scholarship, and then they paid for my postgraduate thing at the Slade, doing painting to stage design. And so I then, you'll have to edit all this down, it's too much ramble. So then I had to so the Slade said to me, oh, by the way, you won an award from ITV. I said, oh, really? I didn't. None of us watched television. None of us knew any of that thing. I said, oh, all right. so I got this award I had one award to go around Europe, and the second year was another award to a postgraduate year. So they paid for my postgraduate in film and which was study as well there. So that's how it happened. Then I asked my professor, shouldn't I go and show them my work, what I've been doing the last few years? And they said, oh yes. And in those days, ITV were very enlightened and clever, not like Punch today. They knew things. And they just said, well, you've got a job. So that's how I started in television. I started as a designer, then I became a director, and then I directed lots of things, and Coronation Street and everything else.
What was it like having a father as a communist?
Difficult, because it was very narrow, that it was black and white, and I knew life was not black and white. And I don't mean...
So I understand. Give us an example.
An example is the fact I had lots of friends who were Tory friends and Alditonians, and I had communist friends who weren't, and I liked both of them, and I thought, well, I like them as people, and then we can argue what we're thinking about either way. So like a Tony Blair person, it was much more a middle way. I thought life is much more to do with a central ground, really balanced people are in the middle. You're not extremists, left-wing Muslim or left-wing or right-wing Christian, all those sort of things. It taught me not to be totally one way or another. So you could say I'm middle ground, and I'm not ferociously something. But I believe that how you and I will get on together is we have a kind of joint view of the world. Sort of really.
I understand.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, because I think what I'm believing, or I come to terms with, is that at the end of the day, we may have different opinions on certain things in life, in society, but the general thing we all want is to be happy.
Yes.
And to be happy, everybody needs a job or a company, and everybody wants to be able to shop, and they want a good education for their children and clean environment.
But the only thing I would add, I don't want to be just happy, I want you to be happy. And the thing is about me, I don't need to be happy on my own. I can't bear it if the man down the road has no money and no house and he's sleeping on that doesn't make me happy. I might be happy in my life, but I don't want to see people sleeping rough on the street and unnecessary rubbish when I know a billionaire down the road has no interest in them at all. That's my view.
How would you say the media, the press has changed from when you used to work in there?
Oh, it's got much worse. I only read The Guardian and The Observer, but I know, and I directed the Frost Show. You've probably never heard of David Frost, but I did the Frost Show in the 70s, and David Frost brought Murdoch over from Australia with a PR man who I happen to know personally, and they were talking about how wonderful what he was going to do for the British press in the 70s. And it's exactly as David Frost said. He showed newspapers from Australia with nude women on the third page. He said, this is what it's going to be like in England. He will bring this to England. Sure enough, David Frost was absolutely right. It's exactly what he did. The press went downhill. he bought the Times, which was a good paper in the 60s, and he degraded it right down to what he wanted. So what he's doing is manipulating the world press in his view that suits his bank account and his family. And that's what he's done. And the British government just allowed it. They allowed him to take over and ruin the British press. It wasn't very good anyway, but it's now very bad.
I watched a documentary, a BBC documentary about the Murdoch family.
Yeah.
And they said it all started when Thatcher removed a law stopping any one person or company owning too much of the media. And then
because they didn't actually care, or I don't think she thought it through. I don't know whether she actually realised she could use it to manipulate the press. I'm not sure she did that, but that's what happened. So now they can manipulate the press. Boris Johnson can say what he likes, and every newspaper, when I go to my, has the same headlines the next morning, except for The Guardian. The Guardian will say where they've swindled it. Or they all were talking about something else. They're talking about Harry and Meghan, something else, nothing to do with what's happening in the world. And they've won.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's scandalous that people that don't know what's going on, they don't know that they're Uber drivers like yourselves, they don't know that whole system has slightly changed. They don't, and how bad it is for certain people. Okay, you say it's, but it wasn't out in the open before. You might say it's not to your advantage, but it was always private and secretive, and it's not in the common press. Mm-hmm. It's not in the press.
I understand. So how do you see the future? Do you see it's going to get better anytime soon? With the press?
Not with this government. I think they're so short-sighted. They'd have no vision. The trouble is with none of them. They're not thinking. The world is in a crisis with the environment. It's a real frightening thing what's happening to the planet, but they're never talking about it because Boris Johnson's busy talking about, oh, everything's getting better. They don't do any planning whatsoever, and they just lie all the time. I mean, you may not think so, but they're always talking about, oh, we're going to do all these green things. One of the green things he was going to do last year, ensuring, making people's houses safer, greener, he's got rid of all that. So, you know, it doesn't take science to realise they're just lying. They don't do any of it.
Yeah, I understand.
But it's also your generation, your children are going to suffer because they can't be bothered, because they don't want to lose a shilling now, but they'll lose billions later.
I understand. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for that, Nicholas.
Well,
very, very informative. And we wish you well. Oh, one last question. I forgot to ask you one last question.
Oh, yes.
What's the impact you want to have on the world?
I want the world to try and recognise the power that we actually have. You as a driver, or whatever, all the complicated things you are, but you have power in your hands. Realise it yourself. Don't listen to politicians saying what you can't have. Get out and protest. Don't listen to Priti Patel and her Nazi propaganda. Get out and protest yourself. Don't put up with them.
That does seem absurd. An Asian lady whose parents were immigrants having a Nazi propaganda.
She's a total Nazi. She's an absolute, I won't say the word on television, but she is a complete liar and cheat and vagabond, and everything she says is complete rubbish. She has no morals whatsoever.
Okay.
Real shocker.
Okay then. Well, thanks a lot, Nicholas, and we wish you well. We hope you liked that interview. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to get the latest daily episode. Ever considered investing in the continent with the fastest growing economy and population on Earth? The same continent that holds 30% of the world's known natural resources? Then listen to our sister podcast, Africa Investor Stories, where you will hear real investors with real stories from around the world share their experience of investing in Africa. We post Monday and Thursday at 10 a.m.